The fact that you're still watching videos like this, the fact that you have not given up on crypto despite this overall generation, that says something about you. You're not willing to just follow the popular narrative. The popular narrative that crypto is dead, that there will be no more capital flowing into the space, that it's all just a scam, and that now all the returns are made on AI stocks. That's the popular narrative. But most people get wrecked following the popular narrative. When did everybody talk about Bitcoin? It was when Bitcoin was close to the all-time high. When did everybody talk about property? Again, that was when the property market accelerated, and then subsequently we got the global financial crisis. We want to be contrarian. We want to buy when nobody is buying. We want to do exactly the opposite of what the mass is doing. And the masses obviously are currently not buying cryptocurrency. This is the performance of all the tokens that are listed on Binance in the last year. The question is, what has a higher likelihood of outperforming when the market turns around? Let's approach this systematically. So this is an analysis about opportunity cost. Should we rather be in A or in B? And let's look at aggregate numbers first. So this is total 3 ES / total ES. What does that mean? This is all the altcoins relative to all of crypto. In other words, we exclude Bitcoin, we exclude Ethereum, and we also exclude the stable coins. And we take that market cap and put this into relation to the general crypto market cap excluding stable coins. How are altcoins in general doing relative to everything if we don't count Bitcoin and Ethereum in the mix? Now, since the beginning of 2018, the altcoins tended to trend downwards. There has never really been an altcoin season since 2018. Many people got rich during the ICO boom, but once that bubble burst and the 2018 bear market started, we never really saw a significant recovery, and we never had strong outperformance of the altcoins. Now, what about the smaller altcoins though? That's this chart. This is the others market cap relative to crypto excluding stablecoins. Now, what's the others market cap? The others market cap measures all the altcoins that are not in the top 10. So this time we don't exclude just Bitcoin and Ethereum, we exclude everything in the top 10. So we just look at the comparatively smaller altcoins. How are they doing? And they actually had a significant revival post 2018. We did hit a new all-time high at the beginning of 2022. This was not true for all the altcoins, but when we just look at the smaller ones, there was a real altcoin season. In other words, the bigger altcoins, the top 10, they did not do that well in 2020 and 2021. Still, since 2022, this tends to rather decline. And we are at the upper end of that trading range, implying that the altcoins might have a comparatively harder time. Now, all of those charts just look at relative valuations, right? How is one cryptocurrency or one category of cryptocurrencies doing relative to the rest? This is no statement about US dollar valuations at all. We're just saying, in case we see a return to a bull market, what should we potentially buy? What has the highest likelihood of outperforming? And so here's the relative chart of all altcoins relative to the smaller altcoins. In other words, if we also include the top 10, we see a downward trend. And if we are not so lucky, that downward trend might accelerate. In other words, ironically enough, there is more price stability in the smaller altcoins than in the bigger ones. This is very counterintuitive. We might think that when the altcoin market in general has a hard time outperforming, that then the smaller altcoins would do even worse. But that's not the case. This is the big versus the small altcoins. So the big altcoins are in trouble. How does that look like for every individual alt? Let's have a look at the top 10. Let's actually start with Ethereum. So what we've got over here, that's Ethereum market cap relative to the entire crypto market cap excluding stablecoins. So total 3 ES. Ethereum tends to trade in a quite constant range versus the rest of the altcoin market. And there is a good reason for that, because many altcoins are denominated in Ethereum. So there's a very high correlation between alts and ETH. This dotted line over here, that's the average ratio of the Ethereum market cap to the altcoin market cap. And we are very close to the equilibrium. So Ethereum is neither overvalued nor undervalued, but it's also no long-term outperformer. Buying Ethereum is almost the same now compared to buying a basket of many altcoins, at least in terms of market cap. But what about BNB? We can skip Tether because Tether is just a stablecoin. Here is BNB relative to the altcoin market. Now, this is long-term quite bullish. BNB tended to outperform the altcoins. Medium term though, we are rather at the upper end of that trading range. And while we do have higher lows, which is positive, we haven't yet seen higher highs. And there's a risk of BNB underperforming the rest of the altcoin market by 34%. So yes, long term BNB can be a good bet. Short term, it seems quite expensive right now. Let's skip USDC because again, that's a stable coin. Let's have a look at XRP. That's this chart over here. XRP relative to the rest of the altcoin market. We tend to trade in a somewhat stable range since 2021. And unfortunately, the current momentum is negative and there is a lot of potential room to fall. Now, none of this is certain. In the end, those are just lines drawn in the sand. We don't know if they will get respected. But I do think that enough people look at similar charts like this. And if enough people do, then those support lines and resistance lines can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If enough people think that an asset is cheap at a particular point, then there will be demand and there will be less supply. And that then fulfills itself and price will rise. The same is true the other way around, right? When people think that an asset has already run its course and that now it's time to take profit, then just because enough people think this, the price will fall. The supply will outstrip the demand. So popular narratives reinforce themselves. They become reality. And so I do think that resistances like this and support lines like this, they have some validity. They're not perfect in predicting prices, but I do think it's a beyond just random signal. And that's why I don't like the current risk in XRP. We have seen massive crashes in the past and now we have topped out at a very similar level where we topped out before. Now what about Solana? Because Solana had such a nice run up with meme coin trading. Here is the chart. This is Solana relative to the rest of the altcoin market. This is actually very positive. We do have higher lows, we do have higher highs. And yes, recently meme coin trading was rather weak, but we don't know what the next narrative will be. If suddenly we see a lot of tokenized stocks and perpetual futures trading on the Solana chain, this could turn things around. But of course, in the short term, there is still risk, and that risk is significant. An underperformance of Solana of roughly 50% versus the rest of the altcoin market. So a similar situation to BNB. Long term, Solana looks positive. Short term, it is quite high in its valuation relative to the rest of the altcoin market. We have to consider we are currently looking at the top 10 cryptocurrencies, and what we looked at the beginning of this video is that we rather think that the top 10 are going to underperform the rest of the altcoin market. So we are fishing here already in a subset of crypto that will have on average very likely a hard time going forward. So it's not really a surprise that the vast majority of charts that we're looking at is rather bearish than bullish. Let's continue with Tron, TRX. Here is Tron relative to the rest of the altcoin market. One of the very few altcoins that's able to outperform long term. It's no surprise that most altcoins underperform and a few outperform. It's a winner takes most market. That's not just true for crypto, that's true for pretty much every market. And while Tron might look nice on paper, again, short term, it seems to have already run its course. And it could, in the bear case, drop by more than 50% from here. Medium term, it looks okay. Short term, not necessarily. What about Hyperliquid? Hyperliquid is one of the very few larger altcoins that I'm long-term bullish on. This is Hyperliquid relative to the rest of the altcoin market. It has done higher highs and higher lows. And I do like the fundamental technology. I use it every day. It's the leading decentralized perpetual futures trading platform. So this is a platform to bet on rising or falling prices, not just on crypto, but on any asset, also on gold and silver or oil, or individual stocks. There's also an ETF where Wall Street can buy into Hyperliquid. And Hyperliquid really fulfills a market niche. It enables trading assets 24/7 that tend to be bound by market opening hours. It also allows for investments in markets where maybe your classic brokerage account doesn't give you access to. So there's a good reason for Hyperliquid's existence. And the project is dominating the space. Unfortunately though, and it breaks my heart. Short term, the valuation is very high if we just consider the general volatility of the asset. Again, in the worst case, more than a 50% decline. And so let's have a look at number 10, Dogecoin. And this is where it becomes counterintuitive. And this is where we circle back to the beginning of the video. The idea is that we want to buy the thing that nobody is currently talking about. We want to do the contrarian bet. We want to buy the thing that has the potential to gain some attention in the future. And it looks like Dogecoin might be exactly at that point. Nobody is interested in Dogecoin at the moment. And that's why the price is low. Yet Dogecoin tended to trade in a pretty consistent range over the last 5 years relative to the rest of the altcoin market. If Elon Musk or anyone else was to suddenly push Dogecoin again, it could potentially outperform the rest of the altcoin market by more than 200%. Again, in the best case. If we just take the data since we traded in that range and we look at the average ratio of Dogecoin relative to the rest of the altcoin market, we would still have an outperformance to that equilibrium of roughly 35%. The risk to reward for Dogecoin, I think, looks quite attractive. I know this is a very contrarian take. Nobody wants to be in meme coins right now. Nobody wants to be in bigger assets right now. But it's not just about the macro. It's also about timing the micro. And while I do like assets like Hyperliquid on the macro, I don't like them in the short term. But I do like Dogecoin in the short term, which I don't necessarily want to hold over the next 5 years. And so again, we have been looking at the top 10, and the larger altcoins are likely going to underperform the smaller altcoins. There are a few exceptions that I think have a good chance to outperform, but in general, as a category, larger altcoins are probably not the place to be. That's at least what this chart implies. Now, when we look at the smaller altcoins, so that's now the others market cap relative to Bitcoin, that's unfortunately also not that great of a chart. So even if we ignore the top 10, we just look at the smaller alts, they are probably going to underperform Bitcoin. By how much? In the worst case, 45%. What this fundamentally means is that whatever altcoin we consider buying has to be very much cherry picked. There are some winners in the top 10, and relatively speaking, there are likely going to be more winners in the smaller altcoins. Still, relative to Bitcoin, the entire altcoin market is probably going to struggle. Asset selection is the name of the game. And if you're not interested in actively trading and selecting assets, then simply stick with Bitcoin. This is Bitcoin's dominance chart, how much of all of crypto is currently in Bitcoin. And there is a cleaner version of this, and that's Bitcoin's market cap relative to the crypto market cap, excluding stablecoins. Have a look at how those bottoms here align pretty well on that chart and how they don't align as well on the dominance chart. So I prefer this representation of the data, and it looks like Bitcoin's dominance, when we adjust for stablecoins, can go up by another 12%. Now what happens afterwards once we hit the historical resistance at 76%? I do not know. Maybe at that point it might make sense to go very hard on altcoins. Especially the smaller altcoins might see a nice rally, but also assets like BNB might be cheap, relatively speaking, at that point. Or Solana might bring us a nice entry opportunity, or even TRX or Hyperliquid. I don't think now is the right time to be in altcoins, but that can change. It could change by the end of this year even. If you believe in the 4-year cycle for Bitcoin, then Bitcoin should bottom out somewhere around October of this year. And then very often, once we see Bitcoin rallying, we see people getting risk on again, right? We see people getting hungry for higher returns. And that's then when the altcoins might outperform. Again, I do think that we need to hit the resistance in Bitcoin dominance first. I do think that enough people look at those kind of charts, and thus it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If Bitcoin is expensive enough relative to the rest of the altcoin market, it will have a harder time to continue to outperform. If it's your first time here, feel free to subscribe. I publish this regularly. A like would be very much appreciated as well. It helps the channel grow. Feel free to also check out the premium membership. That's over here. That's where I share my personal trades. That's where I also share a lot of tutorial videos. There is a 7-day money back guarantee for premium. So in case you don't like it, just message me within the first 7 days and I'll refund you. Link is over here and also in the pinned comment. See you next time. Cheers.